Water research has been a long-standing priority at MSU. In 2012, Michigan State launched the MSU Global Water Initiative, hiring 16 new water research scientists between 2012 and 2016, adding to the more than 100 water scientists already at MSU at that time. Water research is multifaceted, ranging from predicting the effects of climatic influences and preventing pollution to better managing natural resources, advancing sustainable agriculture, protecting groundwater, and ensuring a safe and plentiful water supply. Scientists at Michigan State University's College of Natural Science are planted firmly at the heart of water science to harness it wisely, preserve, and protect it. The effort is intertwined in the continuum of water processes along the water cycle, which include precipitation, surface water, groundwater, the surface-groundwater intersection, and the impact of human influence and needs. In this episode, I'll be sitting down with 4 College of Natural Science faculty members who are part of the original Global Water Initiative hiring cohort to hear about how they are working together to harness their collective knowledge and research efforts to illuminate and address challenges to the water cycle, an extremely important process that enables the availability of water for all living organisms and regulates water patterns on our planet. The participants include Bruno Basso, John A. Hanna Distinguished Professor, Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences, and Kellogg Biological Station faculty member, Sarah Evans, Associate Professor, Department of Integrative Biology and Kellogg Biological Station faculty member, Matt Schrenk, Associate Professor, Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences and Microbiology and Molecular Genetics, and Jay Zarnetsky, Associate Professor, Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. My first question for you is, what year were you hired during the Global Water Initiative, and what attracted you to MSU at that time?
I was hired in 2012 in the Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences. I was attracted by MSU because I knew the university rather well. I obtained my PhD at MSU. And so I knew the type of research that is carried on at MSU, the opportunity to collaborate with an incredible wealth of expertise and excellence. And I was mainly hired to look at water dynamics in agriculture.
I was hired in 2014. What attracted me to MSU was that it's well known for soils and agricultural research. I already knew about the Kellogg Biological Station and the long-term ecological research site at KPS. And so visiting, I saw these fields equipped with the state-of-the-art technology and a nearby labs to the field. And that's what made me come here to be able to study microbes in soil.
I began at MSU in 2014, and I'm a geomicrobiologist by training. And so what that means is I'm used to doing interdisciplinary science. And one of the things that really attracted me to MSU were the range of experts in different fields at a campus of this size, and just the opportunity to be engaged with these various scientists and stimulate new ideas because of that. And so was a big driver for me coming to MSU.
And I started in 2013. I didn't really know a lot about MSU, but it was one of those places that the more I learned, the more I was interested, and that continued to grow. And I was really interested in the vast amount of environmental science expertise that was on this campus and in the College of Natural Science. And I also really liked the kind of humble and collaborative nature that I encountered at MSU, which I hadn't always had at my other institutions. So I was really excited about that. And they also seemed to be really interested in and excited about the environmental, the real interdisciplinary nature of my environmental work. So that's what ultimately brought me to MSU.
What was your primary research focus when you joined Michigan State?
When I joined MSU, the goal was really to evaluate impact of water in agricultural systems. And you basically developed the crop simulation models that accounts for complex interaction occurring in the soil, plant, atmosphere systems. And water is well accepted. It is just a critical element for productivity. But I was also interested in the environmental impact that evolves from a misuse of water, or when water is still scarce, or unfortunately, often in the Midwest could be the opposite, when there is too much water yield is reduced. And so be able to understand these dynamics, be able to simulate and forecast this complex interaction was really the goal that I initially had in mind to build my lab upon.
When I joined MSU, I was working a lot in dry areas. So you might say I was a water initiative hire, but I really focused on the absence of water at the time. I was really interested in drylands and deserts, semi-arid areas, and drought. So I think moving to MSU, I wanted to focus more on human-dominated systems rather than natural ecosystems. So I was interested in doing a little bit more applied work. So thinking about agriculture. And this was such a leader in that area that since my research program has really moved towards more agricultural systems, and I've had to think more about how drought plays a role here, even though there's other limitations as well. And there's also a lot more rain than, say, deserts. But with climate change, a lot of areas are going to experience drought. And water is always a big issue for farmers, really, no matter where you are. So yeah, my program is still revolves around water, but in various aspects.
For me, prior to arriving at MSU, my main focus related to water had to do with microorganisms in extreme environments, so extreme water conditions, so really acidic conditions associated with mine drainage or volcanoes at the bottom of the ocean or other settings like this. And this is primarily of interest for issues like space exploration and NASA related topics, those geological, biological interactions. However, these sort of processes are happening everywhere, and it's been really rewarding to explore the range of opportunities here in Michigan related to water in the context of geology as well. And so my research has sort of evolved in that way from, although we still do research in extreme environments, we found a number of really interesting scenarios in Michigan and the Midwest as well related to water.
Yeah, when I started, I was primarily focused on groundwater and stream water interactions. So how does water move in the bottom of a valley? And by understanding those interactions, I was revealing how the fate of nutrients and pollutants in our river landscapes, our riparian landscapes, our floodplains were evolving, and how that ultimately controlled water quality downstream in other ecosystems and other environments. But I really was coming from a background in groundwater, and so I was kind of like a groundwater researcher slowly moving to the surface to better understand rivers, lakes, wetlands, and that has continued to evolve since I arrived.
How has your research evolved during your time here at MSU?
Well, research by definition evolves. That's possibly why we use research. When we find new things, there are a lot of other things that we'll learn about not knowing enough. And so that has led me to just not looking at water in isolation, but just, again, as part of a much more complex systems, and linking water with nutrients, but also given the fact that I use tools like computer simulation models, remote sensing imagery, I would say that the research has really changed in a positive direction because has become much more applicable, and has been gratifying to see the research applied in seeing farmers adopt this technology, be able to use the information that come from a complex system and guiding them in making more informed decision on how to manage nutrient in with regards of the knowledge of how much water is available to the plants has been a critical step of my research. And asking the right questions in proposals and grants has also obviously helped the lab grow. And the more students and postdocs that join the lab, more questions and more advanced research can be carried on. And so I would say the scalability of what I started has enhanced tremendously, and the gratifying, again, results of seeing the research applied has been one of the major positive change of the research program that I'm leading here?
I would say how my research has evolved since coming to MSU. I'm a microbial ecologist, so I study fungi and bacteria in the soil and what they do. And before I came, I was much more focused on basic ecological questions. So thinking about, what's the limit of how fungi and bacteria can survive, as far as how dry, how warm can they still be active? And why are microbial communities so diverse? Why are there so many species? And I still think about those questions, but in a much more applied context. So thinking about what services these organisms do for us and for agriculture and for restoration, like how are they working to restore the soil or provide soil fertility or climate resilience. And so I think being around colleagues at MSU that study soils, that study ecosystem services, and work in interdisciplinary teams, that's kind of pushed me to think more about the services that microbes can provide.
Yeah, my research has evolved since arriving at MSU by applying some of the same approaches we use to study extreme environments to the diversity of habitats we have here in Michigan, primarily. Learning about the interesting places that can host microbes in water in Michigan, in surface and groundwater, where those issues are both basic science questions, but also intersect with applied issues like land use, like environmental health and human health related issues. And so, going from very basic science to learning about more applied science and where innovation and novelty exists within that setting has been one way in which our research has evolved since joining MSU.
Yeah, since joining MSU, it's been really easy to see how to evolve a research program. It's there's a lot of people here working on a lot of different things, both basic research and applied research. And so you can't help but evolve through that process of being exposed to those people. We still work on basic hydrology questions, focused on the river corridor, groundwater, surface water interactions. But we've expanded our water science in our group to a much larger group of questions and topics that now span very small scale, like pore scale, below millimeter scale, to global scales. And the other thing that's really evolved is I'm not necessarily the engine doing this research anymore. It's the students and the early career people that are in our group that are really the engine, and they also help me evolve and think differently. So some of the big new areas that we're working on that I wasn't when I started is looking at the vast Arctic landscape on the Northern Hemisphere and seeing how that part of the world, which is warming much faster than the global mean average, is responding, how water movement in those rapidly warming landscapes is changing. How does that change the material flux of carbon, nitrogen, and other building blocks of life? So that work has evolved, and I've also learned that hydrology does a pretty poor job of describing places like mid-Michigan, low relief, glaciated landscapes with really complex terrain is not well represented in textbooks and our theoretical models. And so I've also been really motivated to understand how to study the region, the Great Lakes region, and this place that isn't well represented in our prior theory, so that we can better understand the role of wetlands and water quality and connect that to agriculture and water quality in the region. The other couple areas that's really evolved with time is being much more involved in education and outreach. So how do we convey water science and the importance of water to the public and other stakeholders in society? And that's been something that really takes a serious research approach, a really direct approach to innovate in that space. And then the other area that's evolved is now becoming more able to provide leadership roles in facilitating the water science community at large. So taking on roles, directorship type roles that are building the next generation of technology and data resources for the broader science community to do more than the sum of its parts.
How has collaborating with other researchers and stakeholders advanced your research?
Given the complexity of the system we work with, transdisciplinary research is just critical. We will be naive to think that a single discipline would be able to solve much complex problem. You can certainly advance knowledge within the field of your research, but the real impact to society is obtained when you start collaborating and seeing things different in relation to interfacing with other colleagues. One of the greatest example for me has been, in terms of colleagues, has been collaborating with, for example, economists or the social sciences, because we always expect that a potential solution that is so clear for us that should be implemented obviously doesn't account the complexity in the decision-making process. And so the collaboration with the social sciences, I think, is so important in agriculture. So I can quantify the risk of making a decision from a biophysical, aspect, the perspective, but linking that to an economic and a broader, how the spillovers and the impacts on the broader society has, this research is only a result by multiple interaction and collaboration. I collaborate with biologists, entomologists. They are not necessarily the disciplines that I've been, trained with. And stakeholders at large, I do work closely with across the board, from farmers implementing the decision, listening to them and be able to understand what is the real pain that we should really work towards to alleviate. And that, again, is a result of collaboration. And all the way to policymakers to be able to design potential incentives, policies that would be able to compensate, for a decision for the level of risk that a farmer or anyone else making a decision needs to take on. So collaboration is key, and Michigan State is, I would say, by far one of the most advanced university in being able to collaborate without basically any blockage or boundaries. There is a very, very strong collaboration schemes and regimes that we certainly take advantage of.
I've really benefited from the existing large collaborative projects at MSU, even starting and being able to come in as an early career researcher onto large projects with multiple PIs and getting to know people that way and having that influence my research has been, I don't take it for granted. So the fact that we can assemble a team of 10 or 12 folks all working on climate pressures in agriculture is amazing to me, that at one institution, there's so many people doing complementary and similar work. So I feel very lucky to have great colleagues in terms of researchers collaborating with and just people that have expertise of all angles of the issue. So I've enjoyed working across disciplines at MSU. In terms of stakeholders, that's also advanced my research. I've increasingly looked outside of academia for partners in research, and it's really broadened my perspective and just made my work more relevant to society, just to get a completely different perspective on how relevant your work is, how usable, and what you could be doing differently to make your research more impactful. So that's been beneficial as well.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed collaboration with other researchers in terms of gaining perspective on the interactions between water resources, whether it's flow of water and hydrology or water chemistry, and some of the microbial processes that we've been thinking about. So to always be stimulated to look at things in new ways has been a really great outcome of that. But even more generally, starting out with very basic science questions about what's there in the environment and how does it vary in different parts of the system, and beginning to connect with stakeholders, which we've been doing a lot of recently, both in terms of, say, groundwater in the mid-Michigan region, but also in rural parts of Michigan, collaborations with health departments, Michigan Eagle, municipal water supplies, and learning about their different perspectives on the problem, some of which are driven by economics or human health or other issues. And so every time you engage in a different conversation, you learn something new and a new perspective in terms of how the research you're doing connects with humans and their decision making. So that's been a really wonderful part of the process, to watch that evolve and to just be full of new ideas as an outcome of that process, stimulated by the people we're talking to, both researchers and stakeholders.
The role of collaborators and stakeholders it's a cornerstone of a research program, a successful research program in any aspect of water. And I like to keep it pretty simple and summarize it by saying that I think of science as like a team sport, where you really need to work with collaborators and relevant stakeholders if you want to succeed in doing water science. It's simple. Water interacts with nearly every aspect of Earth that you can think of, natural to human systems. It's almost impossible, therefore, to advance your research interests and make meaningful impacts without a team of collaborators and stakeholders in that process. So it's great at MSU being a large institution with expertise spanning so many areas. It means we can interact with a lot of different aspects of water science, and we can draw on their expertise and have them be the chaperones into their disciplines and their specialties, and also use the expertise we have as a land-grant institution and an extension program to make sure we have meaningful engagement with the stakeholders that really help us make an impact, not just develop a new, theoretical discovery, but actually translate that to some knowledge that's useful to the people of Michigan and beyond. So it's been great to be at a place like MSU in terms of working with researchers and stakeholders.
Can you talk about the importance of working with and mentoring students to prepare them as the next generation of scientists and leaders in this area?
Well, I would say I'm certainly privileged to have a large lab composed by staff, postdocs, graduate students, as well as undergraduate students. It's so rewarding to see them grow as a result of new research funding and answering questions, interaction with stakeholders. And so I put a lot of effort in spending time with them, training them to be able to take on different careers that not all of them will be able to stay in academics. And so be able to identify the special gifts and traits that each of these students have is really important as a mentor to help project a potential, future successful career. And so I value that very much. So guiding students, again, is a critical piece of any successful research program. And I'm very fortunate to work with a lab of 22 people.
I really enjoy mentoring, and I really like and genuinely enjoy working with everyone in my lab. I feel a great responsibility to prepare them as leaders. So, they're going to be the next ones tackling all these problems and doing good science. Some of the biggest impact on the way I think and the way I do my science has been from my past mentors. And I only truly realize that as you get later and later and see sort of the mark that they've imprinted on you and how you do your work. So that makes me more inspired to, instill the right values of robust science and creative thinking in my mentees. And so I take that very seriously. They also keep me inspired and motivate me. I really underestimate how much that would impact me as a researcher. They're always coming to me being excited about a new phenomenon or sharing papers or literature with me, or just kind of keeping us in check and relevant and up on contemporary issues. So I really appreciate that. They're showing me different careers outside academia, getting creative with their career paths and different ways to communicate, like through art or through other lenses. So I think it's sort of a two-way street where I'm committed to mentoring them as good leaders and good scientists, but they're also just contributing to kind of a rich and stimulating culture in our lab.
Yeah, doing water science research, particularly as it's evolved from the more extreme environments I've been studying in the past to Michigan, has been a really rewarding part of this, particularly because I can engage more students in the process. And so having more local field sites where students can be standing in a river or at a wellhead sampling and thinking about both the science that they're doing, but also the importance of water and other practical issues related to water resources has been really fantastic. And it's been great to watch the students evolve as they think about that process. But also because, water is a thing that touches everybody's lives. And so it's a way of connecting across diverse groups of people. It's a way of engaging diverse groups of scientists and students into the questions related to water resources. So we've had students everywhere from, biologists to astrophysicists to psychologists, all participating in the sampling and analytical process and learning a lot about water quality issues along the way. And so that's been a really wonderful part of working with water resources, especially locally in the state of Michigan.
Yeah, working with mentoring, learning from students has been central to pretty much everything I've done at MSU. So it's a critical role that I play in training the next generation of students. And it's also really where my values as an individual align with the educational mission of MSU. So it's a great way to really connect to the mission of MSU. And the way I see it is that the students are really the future stewards of water on Earth, and they need to be informed citizens, and they also need to be informed employees working across different industrial, educational, academic, government sectors, wherever they may end up. So preparing them for those different avenues and having them be aware of the importance of fresh water is important. And it's that just the more people are aware of fresh water, especially freshwater resources, the better. And so, for example, the freshwater quality and availability is known to be critical to the sustainability of humanity. So if we're not training the students now to think about that and operate in that space, then we're not working towards a sustainable future. I mean, we live on a blue planet, but less than 0.05% of that blue water that we see is what actually sustains humanity and most of the life as we know it, at least on land. So it's one of those planetary boundaries that we're crossing because we're not managing it properly. We're polluting it. We have less and less of that 0.05% to operate with each day. And it's known. Very few students, very few people know that critical information. And I think if there's more people aware of that, then there's more people are going to value water, and we're going to do a better job managing it and making sure we're working towards a sustainable future. So students in the classroom that I get to work with, students I get to work with in the lab, they're the stewards of the future. They're going to be the engines working towards that sustainable future. So it's a really critical part of what I do.
In thinking about your research, what is the most exciting or revealing discovery?
Well, I guess agriculture has gone through several, breakthroughs over time. I would say at the moment we are in the era of digitalization and computational sciences related to water and agricultural sciences. My particular contribution, I guess, and most important known discovery was the possibility of understanding spatial and temporal variation of crop yields, very closely connected to climate, both dynamics, extremes. And so it's statistics, I guess, not necessarily known across, the public, but a third of the US Midwest is constantly producing low yielding, but is managed with the same input, hoping, to improve the yields, which hasn't happened. And the consequences of that are that there is a significant greater environmental impact. So be able to quantify through simulation models and remote sensing images these spatial variations It basically helps you identify areas that can be managed differently to enhance ecosystem services, to allocate this land to biodiversity, be able to improve soil health, and ecologically intensify the areas where we need to continue to produce the food that we need. So it's a pretty complex. The other gratifying piece of this integrated system is that has been taken commercially and received investment from private venture capitals. And that's a sign of an interest because it's able to help solve problems in the farming community as well as in the food system in general, food companies that will benefit from understanding better areas where they are the food that is coming from could be improved versus areas where it's a little bit more sustainable.
One of the most interesting findings that has sort of we've been trying to expand on in the last few years is that microorganisms seem to care what sort of climate history they've had, in the same way that we intuitively think of plants evolve to or adapt to their climate and habitat. Like there's cacti in the deserts and big trees in the rainforest. So their kind of rainfall they're used to being in matters. And we're finding that that's true for microorganisms as well. So there's sort of wet adapted and dry adapted microorganisms. So that can influence, say, how well microbes support plants under drought. We might think of rainfall history can help microbes sort of support plants through a drought versus some are not as good at that. So we've been expanding on that since we made that discovery, and to find that there's a lot more complexity than we thought, mostly because microbes live in a very different habitat than we can even imagine, where there's these big spaces in between soil pores, or there's these water films. So the way that they are experiencing low water is not the same way that humans or plants are experiencing it. So we've kind of tried to expand in complexity of that to try to get that more predictable. So we're finding that sometimes you can predict how a microbe will respond to water based on what ecosystem they're from, and sometimes you can't. But as it stands, most models don't consider this at all. So we're not really taking that into account, that microbes sort of locally adapt to areas in the same way that plants or animals do. So we're thinking a lot about how to make it more predictable.
Generally, we've looked at the limits of life for microbial ecosystems, and particularly, to what extent into the earth does life exist? How deeply into rocks and fractures of the deep earth does life exist, and who are the organisms that live there, and how have they adapted to those specific conditions? And so, even though this is far from all of the plants and humans and things at the surface, there's a substantial number of microorganisms living deep underground, and we've been trying to understand that for many years. But specifically, we're interested in how they're adapted to these systems. How do they move? What do they eat? And a really exciting discovery we've had in this regard is connecting the time aspect of how water moves through these systems to how organisms are adapted. And so in some cases, when you have very impermeable material where water flows really slowly, like through solid rock, it can take a long time, hundreds or if not thousands of years, for water to move very short distances through these systems. At the same time, these conditions that the organisms are living under can be very extreme, and so they can really limit the extent to which organisms can diversify. Like they can't deviate too much from what works, or it's a dead end literally for them in these systems. And so in studies of some of these subsurface environments, we've been able to sort of look at these combinatorial effects of microbes moving through the underground environment, the water saturated underground environment, and then the limits of life in these systems. And finding that these organisms don't evolve or grow nearly as fast as they do in ordinary systems at the Earth's surface. So that's been a really exciting insight we've had through the study of some of these environments.
The most exciting, that's difficult. I mean, I have to admit that pretty much every discovery that has been led by one of my students, you could argue is the most exciting discovery. But the one I'm thinking the most about right now in these days started off with one of the more unexpected beginnings. One of those things that happened over a cup of coffee with a little bit of morning grumbling, sharing a pet peeve amongst colleagues and a student and a postdoc of mine. And it had to do with the global water cycle, and how it's presented and how it's taught around the world, including the classrooms and pretty much every introductory science textbook it's included in. So this is a real iconic diagram about the natural environment. And it bothered me, and it bothered others when I started talking about it, what was wrong with it. And basically, it's always shown as big and blue and lots of water and a green landscape, and everything's really simple and known. And the real issue was there's almost never any human beings involved in the global water cycle. You don't see them in the images, you don't hear them talked about in the textbooks. And so that really bothered me, and it bothered others. So we started a grassroots project, really led with a postdoc and a bunch of undergrads at MSU in my group, that assembled the materials of the global water cycle from around the world, and then brought in the other key players for the global water cycle, the researchers from around the world. And we just did this all as like a side project, but we put all our resources together. And what we found in the systematic review is that there's massive inaccuracies in how we're teaching and portraying the global water cycle. So our pet peeve was valid. And this leads to a lot of misconceptions. If you're showing the world as being blue and verdant, then we don't think about the lack of water as much when we're policymakers. So if this is the first impression we're giving people about water, and they go on their lives thinking that we are on this big blue planet with tons of water and it's limitless, then we have done a great disservice in the education system. So this work then led to a whole series of papers that had titles like A Water Cycle for the Anthropocene, and otherwise out to policymakers and other decision makers. And it also led to the next generation of the global water cycle diagram and education resources. So this paper, this conversation, all of this led to a really big moment that happened at the beginning of this year. Is we got involved with the US Geological Survey, who basically produces the gold standard for the global water cycle diagram, numbers and educational resources, which then are copied by textbooks and education resources around the world. And they got in touch with us, and we helped consult with them to have them produce new global water cycle educational resources. And that just went live at the end of 2022, and it's already being adopted around the world. So I think that's probably the thing I'm most excited and proud about at this moment in time.
In thinking ahead, what are your aspirations and goals for your research?
Well, my rationale is if you can dream about it, you can make it happen. And so the aspirational goal is really to see agricultural systems be fully sustainable, with the definition of being a sequester of CO2, be a solution rather than a problem, see the agricultural system a provider of ecosystem services, both because we produce food. It's obviously one of the most important invention ever made that allowed, development of civilization. And so sustainability with this broader aspect of environment, economics, and society, it's complex. And so be able to have research that works towards those goals, it's obviously very aspirational. We can do our part with the science, but there is a significant component that has to come from, changes in behavior. Things do not happen unless people are willing to make changes, going from the farmers willing to adopt new technology, be able to bear some of the risk, but the risk being supported by a level of incentives or a level of income coming from, whether it's from consumers or from taxpayers. because it's also not fair that the manager of the lands will bear all the risk in providing some of the ecosystem services. At the same time, they're no longer innocent if there is a technology that will lead to a better system without them implementing it. So be able to consider this complexity of the system and, as I mentioned, be able to simulate and be able to forecast these interactions such that we can make agricultural systems sustainable, resilient, and be able to build long-term sustainability in terms of improved soil health, and again, be part of a solution to this human crisis more than just beyond the climate crisis. And so I feel so privileged to be in this field. And at the same time, even though it can be discouraging at times when you see things, I feel that the human race will succeed, but requires education, science, and willingness, political will and willingness from any individual to change.
Since I study microbes in the soil, bacteria and fungi, and these are really doing the work for soil fertility, I'm interested in thinking about what farmers can measure about this kind of compartment of the soil, and also what soils can do for sustainability. I think there's a lot for soils to do in terms of making ecosystems and agriculture more resilient to climate change. So we're only going to see more fluctuation in water. So usually people are either going to think it's too dry or too wet, or everything running off, including parts of the soil. So and different, depending on the ecosystem, we can kind of build the soil in a lot of different ways to make, to kind of buffer some of that stress and some of that disturbance. So I'm interested in the biological role of that, and kind of creating very usable metrics that can predict different outcomes. So kind of using microbes to predict the future and predict more sustainable options.
What I'm really excited about are the discoveries we can make, here in Michigan, in the water resources we have here, applying some of our ability to work with big data, some of the technology we have to look at micro scales, or to look with high temporal resolution at these systems, and to really just understand the novelty and contributions of some of these water systems that may seem very ordinary, but I'm quite confident to have really exciting discoveries within them. So Michigan has over 1 million water wells throughout it, accessing the Michigan Basin, and the Michigan Basin is a complicated place in terms of oil and gas contributions, brines, deglaciation, agriculture, all of these things we've been talking about all along. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to look at how microbial activities and their impact upon the environment change within the context of this system. And I'm really excited to access all of these exotic places just beneath our feet within Michigan, and see what they hold. And so that's something we've been working towards already, and I'm really excited about developing further over the next several years.
Okay. Yeah. So aspirations, goals for the research moving forward. I like the challenge that water operates at vastly different spatial temporal scales. So I continue to restrict myself to a particular scale. And working around the world is really inspirational. Hearing the different voices, seeing the different problems, but also the same problems evolving and occurring in different places. That's really inspirational. Continuing to innovate and make progress on better educational outreach products. Some of the most inspirational work that we've done is creating art exhibits, experiential learning opportunities for people outside of academia. That's just been just so motivational to see people interact with our art and our exhibits and see what they take away from it. On the research side, really want to continue to grow the Arctic work that I mentioned, it's such a vast and unexplored area. There's just this element of discovery, being an explorer in those spaces. We do get to fly around in helicopters. That's also very inspirational. And see a place that doesn't have a huge impact of humans yet on it. And that just really taps into just this element of discovery that I'm so excited about. But it's also a major factor in the fate of the planet and a lot of the planetary systems that humans depend upon, the fate of the carbon in the Arctic, the movement of water in the Arctic. It's a vast part of the world. It's about 25% of the Northern Hemisphere's landmass. So it's this vast area that is underappreciated. And I look forward to discovering new ways of thinking about and new ways of measuring and new ways of incorporating that into the way we do science. So I'm also really interested in being motivated by the upper Midwest, not my original home, but now my home for the last 10 years. And again, the textbooks that I read throughout my educational journey did not do a good job in characterizing places like the upper Midwest. Low relief landscapes without mountains, places that are dominated by agriculture, places that have a complicated glacial history that really changed the plumbing below the ground in very complicated ways. The theory of hydrology does not well capture places like mid-Michigan. And so I really look forward to working with MSU colleagues and other colleagues from the Midwest to try and put places that look like the Midwest into textbooks and into our conceptual thinking, so that we can do a better job in showing how the role of water controls the fate of contaminants, pollutants, nutrients, etc. And then also what really inspires me is the leadership roles that I'm now able to contribute to. There, you just see the ability to really launch other people, to really help them do more. So the leadership and working in the community at large to help steer the direction of that and help advance the early career people is also of great inspiration to me.
In closing, if people want to stay up to date with you and your research, what is the best way for them to do that?
The updates of my lab are also available on the webpage, or by simply Googling Bruno Basso Lab. Then you'll get all the information about the research and the social.
The best place is probably my website, saraheevanslab.weebly.com. And so we put regular updates on things on the horizon, as well as published papers that sometimes can be a little slower to come out.
You can find the most up-to-date information about my lab and our activities through our website, which is mattschranklab.com. And we keep it pretty up to date with news and photos and publications and other activities and awards that my group is doing.
And if you want to keep up to date and you want to learn more about what we're doing, follow new activities, learn about what we've done in the past, you can go to our website, which is at zarnetskylab.com. Or just Google Jay Zarnetsky. And then from our website, you can get the information and you can follow our social media accounts from there. So just link everything from the website.
In wrapping up, I'd like to thank everyone for joining me here on today's show.